Charlie Monroe wasn't supposed to be here. The auction hall glimmered with gold and polished marble, the kind of room where millionaires made their fortunes without so much as a second glance at the ones left behind. Expensive suits rustled as people whispered, their voices hushed with a kind of reverence that echoed the price tags on their diamonds and watches. And then there was Charlie, a small, ranch-raised girl with boots covered in dust, a worn denim jacket thrown over her shoulders, and the unmistakable scent of fresh hay in her hair. She stood in the corner, not looking like she belonged among these polished men and women in their tailored suits. In fact, if anyone had cared to notice, they might have asked themselves what a girl like her was doing at an event like this. The answer, of course, was simple. But it wasn't one they would understand. As the chatter grew quieter, as Charlie slowly stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor, the others barely glanced at her. A brief, amused glance before their attention returned to the real players in the room. She wasn't worth their time, and she knew it. The auctioneer, a man with a velvet voice and a crisp suit, raised a gavel high. His eyes scanned the crowd, his voice booming with practiced charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we present something truly special. A legend in his own right. A horse with a pedigree that cannot be matched. Introducing Bluefire." The crowd shifted. Whispers broke out. The auctioneer gestured to a stallion, his coat a shimmering blue roan. Bluefire was a name everyone knew. Once a racing champion, his glory days were long behind him, his prime a memory. Now he was little more than a commodity, waiting to be sold off to the highest bidder. He stood still, his regal posture betraying the pain of a career cut short, a champion reduced to nothing more than a broken prize for auction. But to Charlie, Bluefire was more than just a horse. Her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her bag as her eyes locked onto him. There was a connection, something deeper than just the pull of a racing legend. She could see past the bruises, the tiredness, the forced calm. She could feel the fire in his spirit, the wild energy still trapped inside, begging to be set free. She felt it in herself, too. The room had already started to buzz with excitement. People were leaning forward in their chairs, eager to get their hands on Bluefire, to claim a piece of his history. But Charlie wasn't interested in the name, the status, or the price. She was only interested in one thing: what Bluefire deserved. The bidding began, and the numbers climbed with each passing second. 500,000, a smooth voice from the front called out, and others followed suit, raising their offers. Charlie remained silent, watching Bluefire's eyes, the way they flicked to her as though he, too, was waiting. 700,000! Someone else called, their voice tinged with amusement. This horse might just be worth the hype, after all. The auctioneer's voice grew louder as the bid soared higher, and Charlie's heart beat faster. She knew this was the moment that would define everything. She wasn't here to make a statement. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to do something no one would expect. Finally, when the bidding seemed to be winding down, the auctioneer gave a quick glance to the crowd. His eyes narrowed as if he were about to call the auction closed. But then there was a hand. Charlie's hand. The room froze. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the very air had thickened with disbelief. Charlie's eyes were calm, focused, as she slowly raised her hand high. $1 million. Gasps spread across the room like wildfire. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. Logan Whitmore, a breeder sitting near the front, couldn't suppress a laugh. "She's bluffing," Logan muttered, under his breath, eyes locked on Charlie. She doesn't have a fraction of that kind of money?" The room simmered with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, the hum of disbelief vibrating beneath every whispered word. Charlie's hand remained steady. The auctioneer, regaining his composure, hesitated before speaking again. He cleared his throat. Do I hear more? $1 million. Once. Twice. Charlie's gaze never wavered. Then, just as the auctioneer was about to lower his gavel, she did something no one expected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a certified cashier's check. The check was thick, official, and unmistakably real. The room went dead silent. The sound of the auctioneer's gavel was a distant echo as he stared at the check, speechless. Logan's face twisted into a sneer, but it faded as Charlie's confidence grew. Charlie Monroe had just done the impossible. Charlie Monroe's life had never been easy. At 22, most people her age were still trying to figure out their place in the world. But Charlie had been forced to grow up fast. Raised on a small, struggling ranch in a forgotten corner of the West, she'd learned what hard work was before she even knew how to tie her own boots. And if she had learned anything in life, it was that nothing worth having came without sacrifice. Her childhood had been one of constant change. She had watched her parents fight with everything they had to keep the farm afloat, but nothing could stop the drought. Crops failed year after year, and livestock perished in the unforgiving heat. Eventually, it wasn't just the farm that slipped away. It was the dream of something better. Charlie hadn't let that defeat her. Where others would have seen only failure, she had seen an opportunity to rebuild. Her dad used to say that ranching was in her blood, and it was true. Her hands had always been rough from the labor. But it wasn't just the physical work that defined her. It was her unrelenting independence, the way she stood tall when the world seemed intent on pushing her down. As a child, she had loved horses like family. To her, they were more than just animals to be trained and sold for profit. They were companions. They were freedom. She understood them in a way most people didn't. The way their spirits connected with the land, the way they communicated without words, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of nature itself. But it wasn't just the ranching life that had shaped her. It was her journey of survival. When the farm was lost, Charlie didn't wallow in despair. She didn't let the world's harshness swallow her whole. Instead, she found work wherever she could, whether it was in a small-town diner or at a neighboring ranch. She saved every penny, spent her days working, and her nights learning everything she could about business, about horses, about what it took to rebuild something from the ground up. She was nobody special, at least not in the eyes of the world. To most, she was just a young girl with a faded denim jacket and boots that had seen better days. She wasn't part of the elite world that swirled around money and power, the world that was represented by the room full of millionaires at the auction. To them, she was an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But Charlie didn't need to belong. She was too busy carving her own path. As she stood at the edge of the auction hall, watching the men and women who moved like they owned the world, she felt the familiar tug of disdain creeping up inside her. It wasn't the money that bothered her. Not really. It was the idea that people like Logan Whitmore and his cronies thought they could buy anything, even the soul of a creature like Bluefire. Charlie had learned the hard way that people like them didn't care about the worth of something beyond its price tag. They didn't see the heart, the spirit, the raw beauty of a creature like Bluefire. They saw only a financial asset, a trophy to be claimed and discarded when it no longer served its purpose. She wasn't here to play by their rules. Charlie didn't care for the flashy suits, the expensive drinks, or the smug smiles that accompanied the endless flow of money. She cared about something deeper. She cared about freedom, for herself, for the horses she loved, and for everyone who had ever been underestimated. Bluefire wasn't just a horse to her. He represented something far more significant, something she had fought for her entire life. He represented the possibility of something better, a second chance for both of them. Charlie could feel it in the way Bluefire's eyes met hers, as if he too knew what was at stake. Her thoughts were interrupted by the murmurs of the crowd as the auctioneer spoke once again, his voice rising in a practiced cadence. The bidding for Bluefire had begun in earnest. and Charlie could see the money-hungry breeders circling like vultures, their bids soaring higher and higher with each passing moment. But Charlie didn't react, and she remained quiet, steady, watching the action unfold with the same calm resolve that had carried her through every challenge she had ever faced. It wasn't until the final moments, when the bidding seemed to be winding down and the $1 million mark hung in the air like a heavy weight, that Charlie made her move. Her hand went up slowly, almost casually, but the effect was immediate. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward her in disbelief, and for the first time, the millionaires in the room were left wondering, who was this girl? And why was she willing to risk so much on a single horse? The auctioneer stumbled over his words, clearly unprepared for the shock. Logan Whitmore, who had been smugly watching the auction from the front row, furrowed his brow and let out a quiet, dismissive chuckle. To him, Charlie was nothing more than a naive farm girl, out of her depth in a world she didn't understand. He'd seen countless people like her, eager, out of place, and destined to fail. But Charlie wasn't like the others. She wasn't a fool, and she wasn't about to let anyone underestimate her. When she pulled out the certified cashier's check, a murmur rippled through the room. The check was thick, official, undeniably real. And in that moment, as she handed it over to the auctioneer, she silenced every skeptic in the room. Charlie wasn't here to play games. She was here to prove that value wasn't measured by how much you had, but by what you were willing to do to claim your freedom. The room was still, suspended in disbelief. Charlie Monroe had done the unthinkable. $1 million. The kind of money most people in the room couldn't even begin to fathom spending on a horse. The auctioneer, struggling to regain his composure, cleared his throat and slowly began to speak again. But the words didn't seem to matter anymore. The spectacle of a girl in worn boots outbidding millionaires had left everyone in a stunned silence. And then there was Bluefire. The blue roan stallion stood at the far side of the room, the proud creature trapped in a gilded cage of expectations. His body, still muscular but worn with time, glistened under the bright lights of the auction hall. A racing legend in his prime, now reduced to a mere commodity. The shine of his racing trophies had long since dulled, and the crowd didn't care to notice the fire still burning in his eyes. Charlie did. Her heart pounded in her chest as her eyes locked onto the horse. She had felt the connection the moment she walked in. Bluefire wasn't just another horse. He wasn't a tool to be traded or a trophy to be flaunted. No, he was a spirit, untamed and misunderstood. And she saw it in him, that flicker of freedom that, just like her, had been crushed by the world's weight. Bluefire wasn't the horse the world thought he was. He wasn't a broken thing for sale. Charlie could feel it deep in her bones. The moment she raised her hand to place her bid, the world had gone quiet. And she wasn't sure if it was because of the shock of her action or because the horse himself had sensed it too. She wasn't here to buy a horse. She was here to save one. As the auctioneer stumbled over his words and processed the check she'd handed over, the crowd watched with growing confusion. The shock was palpable, and for a moment no one knew what to say. Some tried to mask their bewilderment with fake smiles or snickers, but there was a quiet undercurrent of respect beginning to form, albeit unspoken. They had underestimated her, and in that moment, Charlie had shown them who was truly in control. Logan Whitmore, the smug breeder who had mocked Charlie moments earlier, was no longer so certain of his own place in the room. He stood there, mouth open in disbelief, unable to speak as the reality of the situation hit him. But Charlie didn't even look in his direction. Her focus was on one thing, and one thing only, the horse that would become her partner, her ally, in this battle for freedom. Charlie's heart raced as the gavel finally came down, signaling the end of the auction. The $1 million price tag had become a symbol, a line in the sand between her and the world she didn't belong to. But she didn't care. The moment she made the bid, it had ceased to be about money. It was about something deeper, and then something more important, something that couldn't be bought. She moved toward Bluefire, ignoring the stares and whispers from the crowd as she made her way through the sea of tuxedos and fine gowns. Every step brought her closer to the animal whose spirit matched her own. She didn't feel out of place anymore. If anything, it was the millionaires, the breeders, the people with money and titles who looked out of place. As Charlie reached Bluefire's stall, she felt the weight of the moment settle around her. The horse stood tall, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver up her spine. There was recognition in his gaze. He understood her. He had been in chains, just like she had. His greatness had been reduced to a price tag, a number on a piece of paper, just as hers had been. Bluefire shifted in his stall, his muscles rippling as he pawed the ground restlessly, sensing the quiet defiance that radiated from Charlie. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the stall before she slid it open. The moment her hand touched his neck, she felt a surge of connection. A bond forged not just in the desperation of this moment, but in the shared understanding of freedom's price. Bluefire snorted softly, his eyes softening as he turned his head toward her. She smiled, her face filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when everyone else is convinced you've made a mistake. "Hey there, big guy," she whispered softly, her voice calm and steady. "It's time for you to be free." Charlie had spent so many years fighting for what was right, fighting for a chance at a life that wasn't defined by what other people thought of her. But this was something else. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was Bluefire's fight too. Together, they would find their way back to what they were meant to be. As she led Bluefire out of his stall, she could feel the eyes of the room burning into her back. But she didn't care. She wasn't walking away with a trophy. She wasn't walking away with a symbol of wealth or power. She was walking away with a piece of herself that had long been missing. She was walking away with a creature that, like her, had never truly belonged in this world of shallow, hollow expectations. And they both knew it. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Charlie paused for a moment, looking up at Bluefire, the two of them standing together in the fading light. The world was still, quiet. The people inside the auction hall would never understand what they had just witnessed. They would never know what it meant to be free, truly free. But Charlie did. And as she looked at Bluefire, she knew that the journey had only just begun. As Charlie led Bluefire out of the auction hall, the whispering began. It started quietly, as she passed by the rows of polished vehicles in the parking lot, their gleaming exteriors reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. The people inside the auction hall hadn't left yet, but their voices, sharp and sneering, had already started to follow her. "She's a joke," one of the voices muttered. Barely a whisper, but loud enough for Charlie to hear. She kept her eyes forward, her grip on Bluefire's reins firm but gentle. She'd heard it all before, the doubt, the mockery, the sneers from people who thought they knew better. "She'll never last with him. What does a farm girl like her know about horses?" Another voice added, barely masking the disdain. Charlie ignored them. She had to. She couldn't afford to let him get under her skin. Not when she had come this far. Not when she had fought this hard for this moment. But as she passed through the parking lot, something shifted. A figure stepped into her path, blocking her way. The man was tall, sharply dressed, and his face held a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Logan Whitmore. He was the last person Charlie wanted to see right now. Logan's eyes glinted with a mix of condescension and curiosity. He studied her as if she were a specimen, something beneath his notice. I have to admit," Logan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I didn't expect you to actually go through with it. $1 million for a horse like that? You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." He stepped closer, his posture becoming more imposing as he looked down at her. Tell me, Monroe, what exactly do you think you're going to do with him? You can't even afford a proper barn, let alone the care a horse like Bluefire requires. Charlie's jaw clenched, but she didn't flinch. She had dealt with people like Logan her entire life. The ones who thought their wealth and status gave them the right to belittle others. They didn't know the first thing about her, or the way she had fought to get to where she was. He deserves more than to be a trophy for someone like you, she replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. I'm going to give him the one thing you can't buy. Freedom. Logan's smile widened, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Freedom, he echoed, almost laughing. Freedom's a luxury, Monroe. And it's a luxury you can't afford. You'll have a nice little ranch to keep him in, but that's all you'll ever have. A nice little ranch with no way to actually make him what he was. No way to restore him to his glory. Charlie's eyes narrowed. And for the first time, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Logan flinched slightly, but quickly regained his composure. Maybe it's not about restoring him to what he was, Charlie said quietly, her voice cold and steady. Maybe it's about letting him be who he was always meant to be. Logan scoffed, clearly enjoying the game. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? You're just a girl with some outdated ideas about freedom and $1 million check. You don't belong in a world like this. Charlie's eyes met his, and there was no fear, no hesitation, just a calm certainty. She stepped past him, her back straight, her head held high. Logan called after her, his voice suddenly more hostile. You'll fail. I guarantee it. You're not cut out for this. A ranch like yours can barely stay afloat without the likes of me and the money I bring. You'll never make it, Monroe. No one's going to care about your little underdog story. You'll just be another failure in a long line of them. And mem. The words stung more than she liked to admit, but Charlie didn't stop walking. She didn't stop to engage him. She'd been pushed around by people like him for far too long, and she wasn't going to let him drag her back into that space. The truth was, Logan Whitmore was everything Charlie had spent her life fighting against. He represented a system of wealth and power that crushed everything it touched. The land, the animals, the people. It wasn't about passion or connection for him. It was about profit. Charlie had never cared for profit. She didn't need it to define her. She just needed the freedom to live life on her own terms, to be with the animals she loved, and to rebuild what had been lost. As she walked past Logan and climbed into her truck, she could feel the weight of the stares from the millionaires behind her. They were still watching, still whispering, still mocking her every move. But she didn't care. Bluefire shifted in the back of the truck, his eyes calm, his body relaxed, as though he, too, understood the significance of what had just happened. They were both free now, and nothing, not Logan, not the world, could take that away. Charlie started the engine, the rumble of the truck echoing in the stillness. She drove out of the parking lot without a second glance at the auction house, leaving behind a world that didn't understand her. But she didn't need them to. She had something far more valuable now. Their freedom. Charlie's hands gripped the steering wheel as the truck rumbled down the dirt road, the fading sun casting long shadows over the open plains. The wind whipped through the cracked windows, carrying the scent of hay and fresh grass. Bluefire's hooves clopped steadily in the back, the rhythm of his steps a comforting sound that matched the steady beat of Charlie's heart. The world outside the auction house had returned to its familiar silence. But inside, something had shifted. The millionaires and breeders had underestimated her. They thought she was just another naive girl with a big dream and not enough money to back it up. They thought wrong. Charlie had always been the underdog, but that didn't mean she couldn't win. It didn't mean she had to play by their rules. She wasn't here to follow their game. She was here to change the way it was played. And Bluefire was her first move. When she had placed that $1 million bid, it hadn't been a gamble. It had been a statement, a declaration that she wouldn't be silenced by their sneers or their mockery. She'd come to the auction to set something free, not just Bluefire, but herself as well. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the ranch she had worked so hard to keep afloat would survive, or if she would ever find enough people who believed in her vision. But she was no longer afraid of failure. She had faced worse. She had lost everything before and survived. And now, she had something worth fighting for. As Charlie drove back to the ranch, the memory of the auction still burned in her mind. The look of disbelief on Logan Whitmore's face, the stunned silence that had followed her bid. The way the Millionaires had started to look at her differently. Yeah, if only for a moment. But that moment had changed everything. The ranch was smaller than most, with only a handful of acres and an aging barn that had seen better days. But to Charlie, it was home. It was all she had left after the drought had taken everything else. And now, with Bluefire, it was about to become something more. The road leading to the ranch was long and winding, and by the time Charlie arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world painted in hues of orange and purple. The horses in the nearby pasture raised their heads as she pulled up, their curious eyes watching her truck as she stepped out. Charlie walked around to the back of the truck and slid open the door. Bluefire stepped out with a slow grace, his body moving like a well-oiled machine. His muscles rippled beneath his sleek coat, his head held high, and his eyes, those eyes, locked onto hers. There was a moment of stillness, a quiet understanding between them. Charlie ran her hand along his neck, feeling the strength beneath her fingers. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice full of determination. There was no doubt in her mind. Bluefire belonged here, with her. As the night settled in, Charlie led Bluefire to the farthest corner of the pasture, the one spot where the land still felt untouched by the hands of those who had tried to control it. She opened the gate and watched as he trotted out into the wide open space, his legs stretching, his body finding freedom in the endless expanse of grass. For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt a sense of peace, the kind of peace that only comes when you've done something true, something right. But that peace wouldn't last long. The ripple effect of her actions had already begun. Word of Charlie's victory at the auction spread quickly through the small town and beyond. The underdog had won. A girl with no money, no connections, had taken on the rich breeders and come out on top. And people were talking. At first, it was just the whispers, small town gossip that spread like wildfire through the local diners and coffee shops. People didn't quite know what to make of her, but they were intrigued. They had never seen anything like it. Then, the messages started coming. Young ranchers, farmers, and outsiders from all over began reaching out to Charlie. Some sent letters, others called, and a few even showed up at her ranch, eager to hear her story. They had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for someone like her to rise up and show them that it was possible to stand against the powerful forces that controlled their lives. Charlie hadn't realized how much people were paying attention. She had thought she was just doing what needed to be done, nothing more. But now, it seemed, she had become a symbol, a beacon of hope for the ones who had always been told they didn't matter. It wasn't just about the $1 million bid anymore. It wasn't just about Bluefire. It was about something bigger, something that had the potential to shake the foundations of the world she had always known. The next morning, as Charlie stood in the field, watching Bluefire gallop freely across the pasture, the weight of her decision finally settled in. She had made a choice that would change everything. And as she looked out over the land, her land, she knew that the fight was just beginning. The millionaires, the breeders, the ones who had looked down on her, they hadn't seen her as a threat. But now they would. They would see her for what she truly was. Someone who wasn't afraid to stand up even when the odds were stacked against her. Charlie Monroe had won the battle, but the war had only just begun. The morning after her victory at the auction, Charlie Monroe woke with the first light of dawn breaking over the distant hills. The sun, though still low on the horizon, already promised to be a fierce one, its warmth creeping across the fields as if the world itself was waking up with a renewed sense of purpose. She stood at the window of her small ranch house, looking out at the land she had fought so hard to keep. The view hadn't changed much in the past few years, but today it felt different. Today it felt like the world was finally noticing her. And Bluefire, the soft, rhythmic thumping of hooves echoed outside, a sound that still amazed her every time she heard it. Bluefire was out in the pasture, his powerful frame moving fluidly as he ran. He wasn't just a horse anymore. He was a symbol of freedom, of defiance, of a life lived on her terms. But she wasn't deluded. She knew that the battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Charlie stepped outside, the dry grass crunching beneath her boots. The morning air was crisp, the smell of fresh earth and hay mixing together. As she approached the fence, she saw Bluefire approaching her, his steady gait smooth and confident, his eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. "You're here to stay," she whispered to him, running a hand along his sleek coat. But even as she spoke, she knew that there were forces out there who would never accept this, forces that wouldn't stand for a girl from nowhere, making waves in their world. She had bought Bluefire with money she didn't have, made a statement that she wasn't just another farm girl, and now they were all watching. She had already proven them wrong once. But proving them wrong again, that would be harder. It didn't take long for Logan Whitmore to show up. Charlie had known it was only a matter of time before the breeders, the millionaires, and the so-called real players would come knocking. Logan had made his feelings clear, and it didn't take much imagination to figure out how the rest of them felt. Charlie Monroe, the upstart rancher, had embarrassed them. She had taken their prize horse, their pride, and they wouldn't let her get away with it. Logan's truck appeared on the horizon late that morning, a black SUV kicking up dust as it made its way slowly toward the ranch. Charlie had seen him enough times in town to recognize the gleam in his eye, the kind of look that said he was sure of his power and wanted to make sure she knew it. Charlie stood tall as he pulled up, her arms crossed in front of her, her gaze unwavering. Logan stepped out of the vehicle with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His sharp suit was pristine, as always, and his posture exuded the kind of arrogance that only someone with deep pockets could afford. "Miss Monroe," he greeted her with a mock bow. "I must say, I'm impressed. You really went through with it. But tell me, how long do you think you can keep this up? Bluefire's not some horse you can just toss out into the pasture and expect him to thrive. He's a legend, and legends require maintenance, proper care, real investment." Charlie's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing at first. She wasn't about to get into a verbal sparring match with him, not when she already knew how it would end. Logan's kind never cared for anyone but themselves. "So, you think I'm unqualified then?" Charlie asked, her voice calm but firm. "You think I don't know how to take care of him?" Logan chuckled, taking a step closer. "Oh, I don't doubt that you're capable of feeding him and grooming him, but that's not enough. Horses like Bluefire don't just need food and water. They need more. You can't offer that, Monroe, not on a ranch like this. What he needs is someone who can give him the life he deserves. Someone who knows how to restore his legacy. Someone like me." Charlie's heart raced, but she kept her cool. She had heard it all before. Every person who told her she couldn't do it, that she wasn't good enough. And yet, here she was. "I'm not interested in restoring Bluefire's legacy," she said quietly. I'm interested in giving him the life he deserves. No more chains, no more restrictions, just, freedom. Logan's eyes flashed with irritation, and for a moment his mask of politeness slipped. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, he said, his voice colder now. You may have the money, for now, but you don't have the expertise. You don't have the connections. You'll fail, Monroe. And when you do, don't come running to me. I don't have time for people who waste mine. Charlie took a step back, her gaze steady as she looked him in the eye. I'm not running anywhere, she said, her words sharp. And when I succeed, you'll be the one who's left looking like the fool. Logan scoffed, his smile returning, but without any humor. We'll see about that, he said, turning on his heel and heading back toward his truck. But don't say I didn't warn you. Charlie watched as his vehicle disappeared down the dirt road, the sound of the engine slowly fading away. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't let herself break. She couldn't afford to. Not now. She had made her decision. She had claimed Bluefire, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not Logan Whitmore, not anyone else, take him away from her. This was her fight, and she was going to win it. The sun had started its slow descent behind the horizon, casting the ranch in a golden glow when the quiet of the evening was broken by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Charlie, who had been walking the pasture, feeling the cool evening breeze against her face, paused and turned towards the driveway. Logan Whitmore's black SUV appeared again, kicking up dust as it rumbled down the road. This time, there was no polite visit, no pretense. He was here to make sure Charlie knew just how little she truly mattered. Charlie exhaled, her body tense, but she refused to retreat. She had come too far to back down now. She had fought to bring Bluefire here, and nothing, not even Logan, was going to take him away from her. She saw him stop the SUV near the barn and get out, his tall frame moving with purpose. He didn't waste any time. He was here for a confrontation, and Charlie was ready for it. Logan made his way toward her, his stride purposeful, as though he thought he had the world at his feet. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze cold and challenging. Charlie, Logan greeted her, his voice smooth, yet laced with contempt. I hope you're not getting too comfortable. I just came by to remind you of something. You may have a horse, but you're still the same little farm girl. You're out of your depth here, and it won't take long for everyone to see that. Charlie crossed her arms over her chest, her stance firm. She looked him up and down, feeling the simmering anger inside her, but refusing to let it overtake her composure. You've made that clear enough already, she replied, her voice steady but carrying an edge. But you're wrong, Logan. I'm not out of my depth. I know exactly what I'm doing. And unlike you, I'm not here to build an empire off of others' backs. I'm here because I believe in something. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. I'm here for Bluefire. I'm here for freedom. Logan's lips curled into a smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. Freedom? You think you can give him freedom? He sneered. That horse was built for greatness. He was meant for the races, for the glory. You can't just let him run wild like some common farm horse. You're wasting his potential. Charlie's gaze hardened. You don't get it, Logan, she said, her voice now low and fierce. Bluefire was never meant to be a trophy for someone like you to gloat over. He was a living being with a spirit, a heart, and he deserves to be free. I'm not going to chain him to your idea of what he should be. I'm going to let him be who he was always meant to be. Logan stepped closer, his presence looming, but Charlie stood her ground. The challenge was in his eyes now, the challenge that came with having everything but understanding nothing. His smile faded, and for the first time, a flicker of something like doubt crossed his face. You think I don't understand the value of a horse like him? Logan growled. I know what he is. I know what he could have been, but you can't even keep your ranch afloat. How long do you think you'll last with a horse like that? I've seen people like you. You can't hack it. You'll fail, just like the rest of them? The words stung, but Charlie refused to flinch. She had heard it all before. She had faced down droughts, bankruptcy, and failure. She had been told time and again that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. But she wasn't about to let Logan's words bring her down. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. Maybe you're right, Charlie said quietly, her voice colder now. Maybe I'm not cut out for your world. But I'm not trying to fit into it. And maybe, just maybe, it's your world that's broken. Logan's eyes narrowed, the anger now bubbling up to the surface. You don't know what you're talking about. You're playing at something you'll never understand. He took another step toward her, his eyes darkening. You think you've got everything figured out, but you'll never make it, Monroe. And when you fail, don't come crawling to me. Charlie stood her ground, her eyes meeting his. She was done being intimidated, done being belittled. She was tired of people like him thinking they could control everything. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need his validation. She had something far more valuable than money, more valuable than any title or status. She had something he would never understand. Logan, Charlie said, her voice low and firm, I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Bluefire. I don't need you, or your money, or your approval. All I need is this ranch, this land, and the freedom to live my life the way I choose. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Logan stood there, his chest heaving with barely contained anger. Charlie could feel the weight of his stare, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't backing down. Finally, Logan broke the silence, his voice filled with venom. We'll see how long that lasts. But mark my words, Monroe, you're nothing but a blip in the system, and when you fail, I'll be there to remind you of just how foolish you were. Charlie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her actions would speak louder than any words. Logan turned, his boots pounding against the dirt as he made his way back to his SUV. Before he got in, he shot one last glance over his shoulder, his expression one of pure disdain. Charlie watched him go, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. He could threaten her all he wanted. He could mock her all he wanted. But it didn't matter. She had something that he would never understand. The courage to stand alone, the strength to fight for what she believed in, and the fire to keep pushing forward, no matter how many people tried to tell her it was impossible. As the dust from Logan's vehicle faded into the distance, Charlie turned back toward the barn, her mind set. There was still work to be done. There was still a fight ahead. But she was ready for it. Bluefire was her partner now. And together, they were going to prove everyone wrong. The wind had started to pick up by the time Charlie walked back into the barn, her boots crunching against the gravel. Bluefire was already there, his massive form outlined against the evening sky, his sleek coat glistening under the light of the setting sun. He stood near the fence, his head turned toward her, eyes full of curiosity and understanding. It was strange, Charlie thought, how a horse could know so much. But then again, maybe it wasn't that strange. After all, she had always understood them, felt their emotions, their pain, and their joy, as if they were her own. And Bluefire, despite everything, had shown her that he, too, understood. There was a certain quiet strength in him that matched her own. She could see it in the way he carried himself. No longer the broken creature he had been in the auction house, but something far more profound, a force of nature, untamed and free, just as he was meant to be. Charlie reached the gate, and Bluefire took a step closer, his hooves making soft thuds in the dust. For a moment, they stood together in silence, connected by something deeper than words. She could feel the bond forming between them, a shared understanding that went beyond anything she had ever experienced. This wasn't just about a horse and a rancher. This was about two beings, each having fought their way to freedom. Ready for your new life? Charlie whispered, as though he could understand her every word. Bluefire snorted softly and tossed his head, a spark of the wildness that had been hidden for so long flashing in his eyes. Charlie smiled, unhooking the gate and letting it swing open. She didn't need to worry about him running off. This wasn't a prison for him. It was home, and he knew it. She watched as Bluefire moved into the pasture, his powerful legs stretching out as he ran, his mane flowing behind him like a banner in the wind. It was the first time since she had bought him that she had seen him move like this. No longer confined to a stall or a track, Bluefire was free to roam, free to live. The joy in his movements was palpable, the fire that had once been extinguished now burning bright again. Charlie leaned against the gate, her heart swelling with pride. There were no chains here, no restrictions, just open land, clear skies, and the kind of peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. For the first time in years, she felt that same peace settling inside her. This was where she belonged, not in the auction house, not in the world of million-dollar bids and breeders who saw horses as nothing more than commodities. Here, on this land, she was free. And so was Bluefire. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the earth and the grass with it, as Charlie watched her new companion race across the fields. His hooves beat a steady rhythm against the earth, each step a testament to the freedom that was now his. But there was still more to be done. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Charlie knew that. There were still people like Logan Whitmore and others who didn't believe in what she was doing. They would continue to underestimate her. But that didn't matter anymore. She had found something more valuable than their approval, her purpose, and she wasn't going to stop fighting for it. She had come so far to get here, to this moment of peace, of freedom. And now that she had it, she wasn't going to let it slip away. The ranch was still small, the barn still old, and there was plenty of work to be done. But Charlie didn't mind. She had spent her whole life fighting for what she believed in, and this was no different. She was going to rebuild, not just the ranch, but her life. With Bluefire by her side, she could do anything. As the evening sky darkened, Charlie sat on the fence, watching Bluefire gallop across the field, his movements graceful and wild. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. And for the first time, she felt truly free. Charlie stayed there until the stars began to appear in the sky, her eyes never leaving Bluefire as he ran. She could hear the faint sounds of the other horses in the distance, the wind rustling the leaves in the trees, and the soft sounds of nature all around her. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that only comes when everything is right in the world. Tomorrow, she would face the challenges ahead. But tonight, she could let herself rest, knowing that she had made the right choice. She had given Bluefire the life he deserved, and in doing so, she had given herself something precious, the kind of freedom that couldn't be bought, the kind that had to be fought for. And as the moon rose higher in the sky, Charlie knew that this was only the beginning. The word spread like wildfire. At first, it was just the locals, the small town where Charlie had spent her life, a town where most people still lived with their heads down, struggling to get by. But after the auction, after the $1 million bid, things started to change. People who had never given Charlie a second glance were now talking about her, and soon the whispers began to reach farther than she ever expected. Who was she? Where had she come from? How did she pull it off? Charlie had never thought of herself as someone who would make waves, let alone become a symbol of defiance. But in a world where the powerful often overlooked those beneath them, she had become a quiet force. A reminder that anything, even a rancher with no pedigree, could shake the foundations of the status quo. At first, it was a trickle of people, ranchers, farmers, the young dreamers, who hadn't yet given up on the idea that they could make a living on the land. Then, it turned into something bigger. The news spread to nearby towns, to neighboring states, And before long, Charlie's name was being whispered in places she had never been. The underdog had won. And in the process, she had proven something much larger than herself. That money and power didn't dictate worth. That freedom could not be bought, and it certainly couldn't be sold. Charlie didn't understand the full scope of what was happening at first. She had been too focused on the day-to-day of caring for Bluefire and maintaining the ranch, but it was impossible to ignore the change in the air. The subtle shifts that told her people were beginning to look at her differently. One afternoon, she was in town picking up supplies when a young rancher named Mike approached her. He was in his mid-20s, with sun-kissed skin and hands rough from years of labor. He had heard about the auction and the bold move she'd made to take Bluefire home. "You really did it, didn't you?" Mike said, leaning against the counter as Charlie picked out a few tools. "I've been hearing about you from just about everyone. Some folks are calling it a miracle. Others think you're crazy." Charlie gave him a small smile. "I don't care what they're saying," she said, looking him in the eye. "I'm not doing this for anyone but myself and Bluefire. But yeah, it was a gamble. A big one." "I heard you're giving him a second chance," Mike said, his voice low with respect. "Not many folks would have the guts to do that, especially with a horse like Bluefire. But, you're not the only one who's been dealt a bad hand." Charlie paused, sensing something deeper in his words. "What do you mean?" Mike ran a hand through his hair, looking out the window, as if unsure of whether to continue. "I've been watching my family's ranch slowly slip away for years. We're barely hanging on, barely scraping by. I've been saving everything I've got, hoping for some miracle to turn it around. But I don't know how long we can hold on." Charlie felt a knot in her chest. She had heard the stories, seen it firsthand, the droughts, the rising costs of living, the industries that were bleeding smaller ranchers dry. The world was built for the wealthy to keep growing, while those struggling to survive were crushed underfoot. "I get it," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's hard, but I've learned something. Sometimes it's not about the money, it's about what you're willing to fight for. I didn't just buy Bluefire for the sake of buying a horse. I did it because I believed in something bigger. Hey, that freedom, real freedom, is worth more than any amount of money." Mike looked at her, his eyes widening slightly. "I've been telling myself that for years," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm too scared to take the leap. What if I fail?" Charlie met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. "You might fail," she said honestly, "but if you never try, you'll never know what you're capable of. Bluefire might not be the horse he once was, but I'm giving him the space to find his true self again. I'm not promising he'll win any more races, but I'm promising he won't live a life in chains." Mike nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "Maybe that's what I need to do too." As the days passed, Charlie found more people like Mike reaching out to her, ranchers, farmers, even people who had left the rural life behind, all seeking some kind of hope. They wanted to know how she did it, how she managed to defy the odds and claim something no one thought was possible. She wasn't sure how to explain it. It wasn't a magic trick. It wasn't some formula for success. It was just belief. The word began to spread beyond the small towns. Charlie had become a symbol, a quiet rebellion against a system that seemed to favor the rich, a testament to what could happen when someone who had nothing stood up and said, "I'm not afraid to fight for what's mine." She had no idea how far this would go or what it meant for her future, but she knew one thing for certain. The ripple effect she had started would change everything. One evening, as Charlie sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors that seemed too beautiful to be real, she thought about the impact she had unknowingly made. There were others out there like her, others who had been knocked down, left behind, and told they couldn't make a difference. But now, maybe they were starting to believe they could. And that, in itself, was worth everything. The wind had shifted by the time the evening settled into night, carrying with it the subtle scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Charlie sat on the worn wooden porch of her ranch house, her hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon, as the sun dipped lower, casting its final rays of light across the land. The sight was peaceful, but there was a weight to it, a realization that the past few months had been more than just a battle for Bluefire's freedom. It had been a fight for her own. Charlie's fingers brushed lightly against the fabric of her faded denim jacket as she gazed across the pasture. The sight of Bluefire galloping freely through the fields, his coat shining under the moonlight, filled her heart with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He was no longer a broken creature, a horse whose life had been dictated by someone else's idea of what he should be. Now he was his own, untamed, wild, and free, the way he was always meant to be. It wasn't just Bluefire who had changed. Charlie had too. She had come to this ranch with nothing but a dream and a refusal to be told that she didn't belong. The millionaires and breeders, the people who mocked her for her boots and her simple life, had all underestimated her. But she wasn't trying to prove them wrong. She was simply living her truth. And now, as she watched the horses graze in the open fields and the soft light of the sunset cast long shadows across the land, she realized something that made her heart swell with quiet satisfaction. She had built something here. She had built a life, a future, and most importantly, a home where freedom wasn't just an idea, it was a way of life. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes still fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The wind shifted again, rustling the leaves in the trees behind her, and she closed her eyes for a moment to listen to the rhythm of the land around her. It had been a long road to get here. The auction, the battles with people who thought they had more power, more money, more influence, the loneliness of running a ranch that didn't seem to have a chance to them of surviving, of watching the world around her crumble, and yet still holding on to the belief that she could make it work. The sting of every word spoken by people like Logan Whitmore, people who thought that money was the only thing that could save a person, a ranch, a dream. But none of that mattered anymore. She had proven that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the status or the pedigree. It was about heart. It was about grit. It was about choosing to live in a way that meant something, choosing to fight for something that wasn't just about the next big deal or the next profit. Charlie looked over at Bluefire once more, his body strong and graceful as he trotted back toward the barn. There was something in his movement, something wild yet purposeful, that reminded her of the path she had taken. He too had been pushed into a life that didn't fit him, a life that sought to control him, to define him by his past. But now, he was free, just as she had fought to be. The sound of hooves on gravel reached her ears, and Charlie turned her head slightly to see Mike from the other day, walking toward her, a determined look on his face. He had been one of the first to come to her after the auction, the first to see what she had done not as a joke, but as a symbol of what was possible. He was young, but his eyes had a fire in them that reminded her of herself when she first started out. The same hunger for a better life, the same need to break free from the chains that the world tried to put on them. "You're still here," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Mike nodded, his gaze shifting to the horses in the distance. "I told you I'd be back," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about what you said about fighting for what matters, and I've made up my mind." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Mike took a deep breath, his hands in his pockets. "I've been talking to the bank, looking at the numbers. My family's ranch is going under. I've been trying to keep it afloat on my own, but I can't do it anymore. I thought I'd have to sell everything, let it go. But after seeing what you did, after hearing what you said, I think it's worth fighting for. I'm not just going to give up." Charlie looked at him, a sense of pride rising within her. She had never set out to inspire anyone. But there it was. Mike, standing on the edge of his own battle, ready to fight for his land, for his future, ready to choose freedom, just as she had. "You've got the right mindset," she said, her voice steady. "But remember, it's not easy. The world's going to try and knock you down. It always does. But if you keep fighting, keep believing, there's a chance. You've got to trust in yourself." Mike smiled, a look of gratitude in his eyes. "I will. Thanks to you, Charlie." As he turned to leave, Charlie looked back toward the land, the ranch, her home, the place where she had built something from nothing, where she had learned that the value of life wasn't in what you had, but in what you fought for. She had started this journey to set Bluefire free, but along the way, she had found her own freedom, and as the sun sank below the horizon, casting the land in shadow, she knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The world may have underestimated her, but she was about to show them that freedom wasn't given. It was claimed. And no one could take that from her.